Legend has it that it was written by the Dark Ones. Necronomicon Ex Mortis. Roughly translated, Book of the Dead.
You don't think so? We just cut up our group with a chainsaw. Does that sound right?
Who the hell are you?
Name's Ash. Housewares.
Kunda. Estrada. Honda.
Groovy.
Alright, you primitive screwheads, listen up. It's time to talk about The Evil Dead, one of the most brutal but also slapstick series of movies to ever exist within the world of horror. Depending on the movie you pick up, the viewer can be left squirming, scared, disgusted, and more often than not, reciting some of the most memorable quotes in all of horror history.
What do you say we have some champagne, huh, baby? Huh?
Sure.
After all, I'm a man and you're a woman. At least last time I checked.
Okay.
It's a series that's been reinvented with almost every single release, yet somehow every single release is, for the most part, loved by all. And that's because, as generic as it may be to fight off Evil Dead-like creatures, killing off stupid teenagers in a cabin in the woods settings may be, none of them hold a candle to the grotesque individuality that is The Evil Dead. Created on a hairstring budget, the movie that started it all should have been forgotten to time. Just like the hundreds and, dare I say it, thousands of cheaply made and crude movies of the same style from the 70s and 80s, this particular movie dropped at just the right time.
Scene 22, take 5. Sound 145.
It had just the right amount of creative uniqueness, it pushed the boundaries of what is allowed to be seen on film, it got itself just the right amount of marketing from just the right people, and of course, most importantly, it had a trio of filmmakers that were so eager to make something distinctively them, that they ended up creating what many believe is the greatest horror movie franchise of all time. Those being Rob Tappert, Sam Raimi, and horror's greatest anti-hero, Bruce Campbell, aka Ash Williams. Nobody besides these three, and even then I would say that's stretching the truth a little, knew that Ash Williams would become the horror icon that he would eventually become. Evil Dead's bizarre and eerie setting mixed with Ash's arsehole-like you love to hate him persona became so intoxicating that it spawned comic books, a well-respected TV show, cameos, a musical, a bunch of unofficial Italian spin-offs / sequels, and a whole heap of video games. Hell yes, does The Evil Dead have some video games. A really rich history of them, in fact, starting all the way back on the Commodore 64 and ending up on more modern systems like the Nintendo Switch, PC, Xbox, and the PlayStation 4 and 5. And today, I plan to cover all of this and more in The Evil Dead, the history and the games. Welcome to Slope's Game Room.
Your attention, please.
Before going ahead, if you really want to see something truly petrifying, then I suggest Googling yourself. It's crazy. I looked up a distant family member and I was able to look up his address, his wife, his age, his kids' names, and I can also find him by searching for them too. The reason for this is because data brokers are making a fortune selling your information to robocallers and spammers. And no Kandarian dagger is gonna save you. However, Aura will, and I'm very happy to say that they're the sponsor for this video. References. Aura can identify data brokers who are exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do so. Thankfully, Aura can handle all of that for you. And best of all, you can try Aura for free for 14 days by using the link below. On top of this, Aura does loads more to protect you and your family from online threats that you just can't see. And it's really easy to set up. No longer will you need to download several apps to get your antivirus, your VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and most importantly for me, parental controls. Now you get everything at one affordable price. As a parent with a couple of kids that constantly ask to be signed up to different websites and services, a service like Aura is an absolute must. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you and your family safe online, so you can focus on fighting off the deadites with peace of mind. You can either let those people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can go to aura.com/slopes to start your 14-day free trial. Links down below.
And now, on with the show.
Our story begins back in the 1970s, where our three main men and Sam's brother Ted and Ivan made some pretty bogus comedy movies, including, but not limited to, Attack of the Helping Hand,
How are you, baby?
and The Blind Waiter.
Oh, Harry, you ought to be more careful. There's a lot of money on that tray.
Oh, relax, Stan. Money doesn't grow on trees, you know.
The team quickly worked out that they were able to rent out a local auditorium at a much lower than regular rate, and then show these films to a very dedicated but still loyal fan base in return for money. The Happy Valley Kid and its murder were notable milestones for the crew, as they cost less than $1,000 each to produce, but returned a significant amount more than that, as their audiences grew and grew. Over time, their love of acting, producing, storytelling, and of course copycatting the Three Stooges grew stronger and stronger. And as these were the days of anything goes Grindhouse, the jump between what was being shown on the big screen and what these young students were doing, well, it wasn't all that big. This led Raimi and his ragtag team of filmmakers to drop out of college and simply just go for it, as they attempted to create a movie of their own. Now, even though comedy was the main focus for the team up to this point, and they were fairly successful in ripping off that OTT Three Stooges style for their own movies, in the world of feature films, it was horror that was being shown constantly in drive-in theatres across the country, and for the most part, really, really bad horror films.
Now, blood eaters are out there. They are coming, hunting, searching out fresh prey. Without feeling, without mercy, they track their victims down. Nothing will prepare you for the horror of these butchers of the damned. Nothing will protect you from the terror of the blood eaters. See Blood Eaters, rated R.
There's these drive-ins, and we can make a movie better than the crap we're seeing in the drive-ins. That was really, at that time, like 25% of the movies in America ran in drive-ins.
For the group, this seemed like the perfect path moving forward. After all, the jump from slapstick comedy to grotesque horror isn't all that different, from a filmmaker's perspective at least. And with that, they got jobs as waiters, taxi drivers and janitors, raising money in order to hire an attorney to create a contract that they would then show to willing patrons who would want to give them money to make some random horror film. With cheap suits and a contract in hand, the trio showed their new legal contract and a short Super 8 movie called Within the Woods, which was a proof of concept Evil Dead-like movie to anyone with money to offer, and in short, it was a real slog.
We had dentists, a couple of dentists go in. We had some real estate people, but it was tough to get the people who had money in, who were merchants, who owned stores, because a lot of those people who had money, we would approach them. They're used to paying money and getting heads of lettuce or bottles of wine, and we wanted them to give us money for nothing for this movie that might be successful, might not. And I remember we showed this first little Super 8 movie in the detergent aisle of a grocery store after it closed to a couple of merchants, and they didn't invest. but we went to absolutely anybody who was financially capable of losing all their money.
Eventually, the team raised roughly $90,000, which was just enough to start filming The Book of the Dead in November of 1979.
Seat 84K, take 5, sound 789. Ready? And action.
A supernatural horror flick where 5 students make their way to an isolated cabin in the woods for a short vacational stay. Almost instantly from the journey leading up to and entering the cabin itself, things are not what they seem. Very early on, the group discover a book covered in human flesh and inked in blood, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, or simply the Book of the Dead. And when they play a tape recording that they find with it, that recording recites what is written in the book, and of course, all manner of devilish evil comes after them for the rest of the franchise. Now, the lore behind The Evil Dead is actually far more broken than the majority of horror movies to date. The first is a horror through and through. The second retells the entire story of the first in 7 minutes because they didn't have the rights. The third continues on instantly from the second, but begins slightly differently than how the second ends. Number 4 and number 5 are remakes and sort of continuations, so they are not part of the original trilogy, but still do have slight links. And the TV show ignores the events of the third film and ends on a cliffhanger that's almost exactly the same as the end of the third film, but not the one that was released, as studio executives thought it was too morbid. Yeah, continuity isn't the Evil Dead strong point, and it gets a whole lot worse than that. Either way, all you need to know now is that as soon as those evil words are spoken 16 minutes and 41 seconds into the first movie, life for almost all of these students would be cut very short. As the film takes a wild turn, not only do they become possessed with brutally murdering each other, but on top of that, pretty much everything inside and outside the cabin, whether you see it or not, becomes, well, evil. And as it turns out, the production of this flick wasn't exactly a leisurely stroll through the woods either. In fact, working on The Evil Dead was a nightmare in and of itself. For 8 weeks, the team would convert the 65-page script into the horror masterpiece we know today. In a cabin with no heating, no running water, no electricity, a cabin that was full of animal excrement on arrival, and according to the odd thread online, was the location of several real-world murders prior to filming. Although keep in mind, I actually wasn't able to find any proof of this myself. Either way, they went through hell to make the movie that we all know and love today.
It got very cold. I think that was the most difficult part about the shoot. One time, in fact, it was so cold that I couldn't stand the slow torture of freezing to death so slowly. So I actually crawled outside and laid down to die in the cold. But Rob, the poor bastard, covered me with a blanket, and here I am today.
And that's the director. Injuries occurred often on set. Constant reshoots were the norm, and they had to do all of this whilst covered in uncomfortable, cold clothing soaked in fake blood. Which, in case you're wondering, the recipe was 6 pints of clear Caro corn syrup, 3 pints of red food colouring, 1 pint of non-dairy creamer, and 1 drop of blue food colouring.
This blood is, I can't really explain to you how horrible it is. It's basically the substance similar to maple syrup. And this stuff dries and hardens, and it starts pulling your hair. If you move, it sticks to your clothes. And it hurts, and his whole body was covered in it, and he always had to be in this blood. And this is at like 15 degrees Fahrenheit all the time, so not only is he covered in maple syrup, but he's freezing to death.
All of these combined results in a film that simply would not be made in this day and age. I mean, come on, no production company is going to be allowing for this nowadays. And to be fair, they weren't exactly happy with it back then either.
The whole place eventually had a coat of sticky Caro syrup over it, everything. And anytime you wanted to touch the camera, you had to turn on the coffee machine, because we had enough water for a coffee thing, and wash your hands in this scalding coffee. I remember doing that many times. It was horrible. And then grab the camera, and then you pick up something, damn, and you get the stuff on your hands again. So that was fun.
As production continued, the cast and crew became increasingly frustrated. Several members left over time, and a lot of the remaining scenes were made up by the ever-diminishing skeleton crew, including Sam himself.
I felt under great pressure, and it was not artistic pressure, it was all financial pressure, because there were no expectations on me as a kid. It was all a question of, I have $90,000 of these people's money who I promised I would make a good movie out of. This has got to be good. It's strange, but that's where I was coming from back then.
Yep, that's Sam, who had no choice but to finish the movie and hopefully pay back all of his investors. Regardless, as terrible as the setup was for this original movie, one of horror's greatest movies, the one saving grace is that torture and that hardship that they went through on set does relay quite nicely to what we get to see on the screen. Oh, and one last thing, which I quite like, is that the iconic trapdoor that the Deadite gets locked into isn't a real basement door. The filmmakers quite literally had to cut a square out of the floorboards and then dig a hole in the muddy, no doubt corn syrup-filled earth, and then chuck an actor in there and lock it shut. Sadly, the cabin is now gone, burnt down to the ground with only the fireplace and that iconic hole left in its place. Presumably, this was done by the owner of the cabin himself, after many a drunken night by hardcore Evil Dead fans that found the cabin. It went up in flames. Plenty more could be said about the making of this film, like the way they ran out of money and had to go looking for more investments halfway through production, the way that Bruce sprained his ankle in one scene and then Raimi would hit it with a stick during performances to get real painful reactions, how they had to burn unused furniture to keep warm, one actress lost her eyebrows in a plaster mold, everyone that had white eyes were wearing glass contact lenses that made them completely blind during production, they couldn't afford fake glass, so they would literally smash a camera through real panes of glass in front of actors. And most importantly for this video, when they finally did finish the movie, nobody was really that interested in the Book of the Dead. It's the age-old story, isn't it? A fantastic piece of work is left untouched because the suits up top do not realise what they had on their hands. And just like YouTube these days, no matter how good the video is, nobody's gonna click on it if it doesn't have the right thumbnail, title, and most importantly, it isn't marketed right. And the same rule of thumb, of course, goes for this movie too. Thankfully, Irvin Shapiro got involved not long after its initial theatrical release, someone who had made history in marketing movies, and he took this generic but still excellent picture that nobody was that interested in, and first things first, he renamed it. The Evil Dead, as it was now known under Shapiro's management, eventually made its way to Cannes Film Festival. Okay, not the glitzy, glamorous version we've all seen on bonus features of our favourite Spielberg movie. Nope, just like all low-costing B-movies, The Evil Dead could be seen on a much smaller screen down the back alley of a random establishment that played these sort of shows. Still, The Evil Dead was at Cannes, and that's all that mattered, because one of the people that saw it at Cannes was none other than author, horror legend, Stephen King, who in his review stated that the movie, The Evil Dead, was the most ferocious original horror film of the year, in his review for the Twilight Zone magazine. To say this helped get the name out is an understatement. The movie did very well in the cinemas that would play these sort of movies at least, and after that it found extra success in foreign countries as it aired not only in cinemas but on VHS too. You see, when the movie was released in cinemas, it was cut by the British Board of Film Classification. However, when it came out on VHS, all of the cut stuff got put back in. This was thanks to a loophole in film classifications. Distributors didn't need to go through the grueling and expensive review process when mass producing for VHS in the early days, which not only saved money, but it allowed for the marketed uncut edition, as well as plenty of over-the-top gore found on the front cover. Of course, this led to a whole heap of controversy, aka marketing for these tapes Heck, one of the most obvious examples of this was when the distributor for the overly gruesome Cannibal Holocaust flick complained about their own film in order to get people talking, which worked. And even though this apparently wasn't the initial intent when marketing The Evil Dead for VHS, it's hard to believe that's the case when Raimi would go on talk shows and get absolutely blasted by people that thought it should be banned.
Sam, let me just ask you first of all as to why it's important to show people being dismembered. There was actually a scene in Evil Dead of a woman being reared by, of all things, a tree. Now, how necessary is it to have those kind of scenes in horror films today?
Well, I don't think it's necessary specifically to have any particular type of scene in a horror picture.
Why would you ever go on this show if it wasn't to promote your films? Well, it's obvious. To get people like this talking, isn't it?
You know, people who say, but why shouldn't adults be able to see this kind of thing in their own home? I'm half tempted to say that people who make that kind of demand, knowing that children are likely to see it, aren't really themselves very mature and adult.
Thanks, Mary. Good old Mary Whitehouse. Britain's textbook definition of a harmless old lady who, underneath that Mary Poppins persona, spent the vast majority of her time trying to take down absolutely anything that she deemed too sexy and or violent. And boy oh boy did The Evil Dead fit that bill. Because of this unclassified release of Evil Dead, the movie found its way onto the official DPP list, or the Directors of Public Prosecution list, or the Video Nasties list, which essentially turns mostly horror B movies into the equivalent of a Disney classic animation checklist. But of course, for horror fans that wanted to watch the movies that were so gory they were illegal in their uncut form.
I have never seen a video nasty. I wouldn't. I have far too much.
How can you judge on a video nasty? You've never seen one.
Look, if somebody tells me, as we get these reports in from Europe, from America, and from this country, that a particular video nasty contains that, and that, I actually don't need to see visually what I know is in that film.
Thanks, Mary. The Evil Dead in particular was, and I quote, the #1 video nasty, as described by Mary herself, as it was selling bloody brilliantly. Thanks, Mary. Of course, even though some of the world wouldn't see the uncut release until many, many years later, it's because of all of this perfectly timed luck that propelled The Evil Dead into the world of infamy. Just like The Exorcist that came out before it, there once was a time that saying that you've seen The Exorcist or The Evil Dead back in the 90s in the UK became a bit of a badge of honour, even though far cruder, more extreme and gorier movies definitely existed legally, especially compared to The Exorcist. The Evil Dead, maybe not. But the thing that made this stand out was that behind all of the buzz was quite simply an exceptional movie. And as already stated, it's the movie that spawned a whole lot of everything. Palace Video were the ones to distribute the flick onto VHS, without classification of course, and as part of that deal they were allowed to distribute things like video games too. The first ever video game created in the series started production in 1983 by Richard Leinfelder and Pete Stone.
Yeah, I mean, I founded Palace Software with Pete Stone. It's kind of, I used to work at the Video Palace, which was... we rented videos and sold video recorders and laserdiscs and games. And I suggested to Pete that we're selling lots of games, we should make them. And he thought it was a good idea, so we raised some money inside Palace and started Palace Software. And one of the videos we had distribution rights to was Evil Dead. So we had a relationship with Sam Raimi on that. And we thought, since the video rental for that tape was very good, we thought we'd make a game of it.
Yep, as simple as that. 1983 was a different time, but not different enough to not understand the potential of video game movie licenses. The Evil Dead was the first game chosen by the company because it had action and a simple mechanic that could be translated pretty quickly onto the Commodore 64. You take control of Ash, and after entering the house, your job is to run around as infrequently as possible so you don't lose too much of your energy, which goes down with every single movement. Killing the Evil Dead and making the whole process easier by constantly closing the doors and windows, stopping the gusts of wind from coming in and turning your housemates into zombies. Yep, if you ever wanted to know what was behind that iconic Sam Raimi chase camera scene that fought the actors through the woods, well, now you know.
We needed a launch game, basically. When Evil Dead was just so obvious, really, because we had the sole distribution rights, and it was just the easiest thing to do.
By 1984 standards, it wasn't the weirdest idea for a game like this. What was weird was that Richard, the lead programmer, designer, game plan maker, and everything else, didn't like horror movies. You're not exactly a horror fan yourself.
Oh no, not really. Hate them.
No. Still, it didn't stop him. After watching the film and eating pizza, Rich and Pete began working on a design document which was completed in only 2 days. And then, shortly after, they hired Chris Neary to originally start work on an unfinished game based on the Halloween franchise before he pushed that aside and helped create The Evil Dead.
Yeah, I was the second programmer at Palace Software.
After speaking with Chris, who was not an artist, but was responsible for a lot of the art found in the main game itself, Chris remembers that because of the severe backlash the movie was getting, that they couldn't make the film too scary.
You know, we had to be super duper careful about what we put in it. Hence, the end result of The Evil Dead is more comedy than any horror at all. We specifically had to stay away from blood and gore and anything like that.
Yep, a survival horror video game. Created by someone that doesn't like horror, with artwork done by someone that's not very good at art, based on one of the most goriest movies ever that can't include any gore.
That was a conversation over a cup of coffee from Pete Stone. He said, we cannot make this game violent in any way, shape or form, otherwise they will simply just close it down.
As you would expect, the end result didn't exactly end up great. But that didn't matter. It had the license, goddammit, and nothing, including being on that video nasty list, was going to stop them.
We were based in the video vault of Palace Video. That's where Palace Software was. We were above the Scala Cinema, where all the master tapes for Palace Video were kept. So we got raided by the Obscene Publication Squad, wanting to take away all the video copies of Evil Dead. And we just didn't want to take the risk that, the police knew the difference between a video game and a video, and take our computers away, and that would basically stop us. So we kept very stum about what we were working on. So we didn't tell them we were working on a video. We didn't tell them we were working on a game. So they came in with, the heavy mob taking all of the video tapes away for Evil Dead. And, so saying, what do you do this? Oh, we just do some computer programming. It didn't actually, because we knew it was going to happen. So we took down all the Evil Dead posters and everything else, all the game posters, and we just pretended we're some IT geeks.
Upon release, the game did well enough to garner some above average reviews from magazines, and most importantly for Rich and Pete, it started a video game company that would eventually go on to do some rather incredible things that continued to wind up Mary Whitehouse.
Where we got the most attention from Mary was with Barbarian, which she wanted banned, which really helped our sales amazingly.
Thanks, Mary! But it wasn't just Mary they used to get the media talking.
On the way to take the tape to the duplicate, it used to come on cassettes. We used to go to Abbey Road Studios where they would duplicate the cassettes for us. And when I was riding my bike up to the replicators, I got knocked off my bike and broke my arm. So we actually spun that as a PR story as well as the Curse of the Evil Dead.
Oh wow! Awesome.
Lead programmer gets knocked off his bike to deliver when he's delivering the master tape, and we got some really good PR out of that as well.
Oh, and also, whilst promoting this game, they decided to hold a press junket at the world-famous London Dungeons. However, by the time that date eventually came round, the game wasn't finished.
I managed to get quite a good amount of publicity out of not having the game there, so it does actually work quite well.
In the end, the game sold fairly averagely for the time, between 5,000 to 6,000 copies, and the port that was created by a third-party studio for the ZX Spectrum was liked even less by the company, and as a result, got added as a freebie on the B-side of the upcoming game Cauldron, which itself was a reworking of that unfinished Halloween game by Chris, by the way.
Yeah, so yeah, it took about 6 months to do, start the company and publish it. It wasn't the greatest game in the world, but it helped us launch the company.
I wanted it to be more than it was, and I think Richard wanted it to be more than it was as well. I mean, you got to remember, we were launching a company. We wanted a #1 hit. That's what we wanted, but we just simply didn't have the experience.
So, that was 1984. The ripples that this movie, and not so much the game, left behind, for better and for worse, was still being felt. Because of this, in 1985, Sam Raimi and other higher-up execs that owned the rights to this film found themselves in court fighting to get The Evil Dead off the Video Nasties list. Of course, it was the tree that, didn't ask for permission scene. Yeah, that should get past the YouTube algorithm. Which helped it get on such a list in the first place. But still, a fair amount got deleted from that and many other scenes, and even though it garnered an incredible amount of notoriety, the sequel ended up going a completely different way.
Evil Dead 2 represented going back to our comfort spot. And we also were better filmmakers at that point, so it was actually not a horrible experience.
Yep, that's true. But just like the original, this one also had a bit of a troubled production. After the success of The Evil Dead, Sam wanted to create something different because he didn't want to be labelled as just the horror guy. Unfortunately for him, nobody was listening again. Because of this, Sam reluctantly went ahead and created the film Crime Wave, which, by the way, I haven't watched, as the end result was far from great. In fact, it was pretty terrible according to reviews, and Sam himself, as movie producers and company execs changed it constantly throughout the making, turning it into something that Sam was no longer happy to be a part of. And that's why. The movie absolutely bombed for Sam, and it was because of this that the trio saw the writing on the wall for their movie-making career days.
And the film was re-edited, and the studio got involved, and we lost control of it, and it was a huge learning curve. And after that bond, we were like, well, this isn't good.
The only thing left to do was to make an Evil Dead sequel, which Sam really didn't want to do. That was until he turned to his old pal and Super 8 short collaborator Scott Spiegel, who, as already mentioned, worked on the short Attack of the Helping Hand. And for anyone out there that's seen both films, it's pretty obvious that The Evil Dead 2 was just as much of a sequel to the original as it was to this short. The final hurdle the team needed to get the film made was that they needed a studio to actually greenlight it. Thankfully, that's where Stephen King got involved once again. By this point, the original movie was doing gangbusters overseas, thanks in no small part to his glowing review. And this was when Stephen contacted Dino De Laurentiis, someone who was an absolute kingpin within the world of overseas horror movie distribution, and got him to upfront the money for The Evil Dead 2. But of course, by having a movie that they didn't want to make originally, getting someone else involved who created slapstick shorts, and not having the original studio behind them resulted in a movie that is so very different to the original. The Evil Dead 2 is a seriously confusing film as the team didn't have the rights to the original. This resulted in them having to remake the ending, the ending where everyone dies, presumably. Because of this, plenty of moviegoers, myself included, when I first saw it as a teen, came to the conclusion that Ash was stupid enough to go back to the cabin. Which obviously he didn't do, it was just shot again and in a different way, retelling the story found in the original. Just like before, Bruce went through hell creating this film, as did Sam's brother Ted Raimi, who was dressed as the main Deadite of the movie. Honestly, at first, for me, I don't really feel like I understood what this movie was going for. Sure, it had horror and it had gore, plenty of it, but for me it felt more like a comedy. It felt more like a extreme version of Ghostbusters, if anything else. Of course, several years later, after watching it again, I got it. The movie has gore, yes, it has corniness, it has horror and suspense, but from this exact moment, the moment where Ash goes crazy in the funhouse cabin, this is just as shocking as any pencil in the leg can provide. It shows Ash, the character, grow into the horror icon that he deserves to be. He loses his marbles, he starts to just not give a ish. He becomes the character that the rest of the original franchise would be based on. One-liners and all. Whilst other video nasties hold on to that label as a badge of honor, The Evil Dead reinvented itself. When you think of Ash or The Evil Dead as a whole, most people now start from this point on. That's not taking away anything from the original. It's just that this second movie does something that the majority of other movies just don't do. This is so rare. In most people's eyes, it's the better film. And unlike the original that ended with everybody dying, or at least that was the impression for the time, the third movie, 1992's Army of Darkness, takes it even further away from its horror roots as Ash is transported accidentally back to the Middle Ages in order to fight the Deadites off once again. Talk about a tonal shift. The setting is the Holy Grail, but boy oh boy is this still Evil Dead in tone and of course style. Starting his life off as the brilliantly named Medieval Dead. I still think they should have kept that one, by the way. The Evil Dead 3 Army of Darkness is by far the most polarizing movie in the series, but that didn't matter. The most important thing that this movie had going for it was Ash himself, who had become way more Ash than ever before. Chasing women, acting like a douche but still kicking ass every step of the way. Once again, the main story continues where the last one left off. Confusingly, as he was hailed a hero instantly at the end of the second, which simply just wasn't the case for the beginning of the third flick, Ash finds himself in the time period he doesn't want to be in, the 1300s. The main story involves Ash being more smart aleck than ever, killing Deadites and trying to get back to the 1980s. In retrospect, the movie is a hilarious entry into the franchise that takes a wild turn. It's familiar to fans of the series up to this point, but again, only really in retrospect, as for the time, it wasn't all that popular. At the time, the studio wanted to turn this sequel to a movie so gory that it was banned from classification into a PG-13 action adventure. But no matter how many times they re-edited it, they simply couldn't get it down to that rating. Even the name, The Evil Dead, got removed from the majority of marketing in that region, and they did this to obviously get that rating down, which they simply couldn't do. This resulted in them changing the ending to the film and cutting the movie that they themselves at least weren't that happy with. Even Japan themselves had a great stab at cutifying the movie with their posters. Oh, and by the way, the Delta car drop sequence you see at the beginning of the film, that was done by a crane lifting it up and hanging it over the side of a cliff. Unfortunately, before the camera started rolling, the crane itself ended up falling off the cliff, and although nobody was hurt, it did of course set the film back a bit during production. Army of Darkness would become Ash's final proper entry within the world of movies. Of course, it wasn't the end for Bruce Campbell himself, as he went on to work in plenty of movies, and Sam Raimi, of course, went on to work on such movies as the original Spider-Man trilogy, the best Spider-Man trilogy, and Drag Me to Hell, one of the best horror movies from the last 10 years. But as for The Evil Dead, it was game over. Now, of course, that final movie ended up building a huge fan base when released in the home, but besides that, well, that was it. The same year that Army of Darkness started production, Possessed Productions released a demo for the Amiga simply titled The Evil Dead. Virtually nothing is known about this demo. It's not believed that anything extra was ever worked on outside of this super simple yet beautiful demo. Ash ended up finding his way into plenty of comic books and merch throughout the 90s and up to this day, as the constant tease of a fourth film spread around in magazines and early message boards. And to be fair, the rumours were not exactly unfounded. Even during the production of Army of Darkness all the way up until now, in virtually every single interview, people have been talking about the Army of Darkness 2, Evil Dead 4, Evil Dead remakes, and even Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. Now, of course, the latter did end up coming out in comic book form, along with a whole heap of other really weird crossovers. And we eventually did get that remake too, which is utterly fantastic. And of course, again, we also got the TV show, which again is utterly fantastic. In fact, if you ask me, it is perfection. The first episode in particular is pure perfection. Probably the best opening to a TV to movie show adaptation ever created.
It's good to see you, Jefe.
Good to be back.
How does it feel?
Groovy.
But a fourth proper movie? No. I kind of hope we don't get one. The series is perfect as it is, and those new movies, the first of which is one of the greatest horror remakes of all time, are very much their own thing. Even if a third, fourth or fifth flick comes out that stinks, it wouldn't ruin what we have with the original trilogy. Army of Darkness 2 or Evil Dead 4, however, just might. But all is not lost, because if you really do want a fourth adventure with Ash Williams within the world of Evil Dead, then Hail to the King for PC, PlayStation and Dreamcast, it's gonna disappoint.
Well, are we ready to take a look? Yeah. Oh, that's perfect! Oh God. Got anything smaller?
All you need is a chainsaw for an arm and a shotgun to be just like Bruce Campbell in Evil Dead. Hail to the King.
Hey, isn't that supposed to be a chainsaw?
You want a piece of this? Yeah, I didn't.
Rated M for mature.
Come on, you freak!
Help!
Come on,
Bruce
take it like a
Campbell's
man!
chasing me!
Released in 2001, depending on your region and system, Hail to the King continues on from the third film. After getting a girlfriend at S-Smart, Ash, who can't shake the nightmares of his past, is convinced by his new girlfriend to go back to the cabin once again and face his demons, quite literally. Yeah, even for Ash, this was a terrible idea. Still, it did allow us to go back to familiar ground and start playing this game on familiar territory within the world of the Evil Dead. Upon arrival, his still quote-unquote alive severed hand runs to the tape recorder to play the forbidden words from the Necronomicon once again, and voila, it's time to start this whole thing once again. Now, by 1999, the Resident Evil franchise was of course the gold standard for survival horror, and this was taking all of its cues directly from that. Fixed cameras, tank controls, all that good or bad stuff depending on who you ask. Me? I don't like it. The story, as dumb as it is actually quite fun, especially considering the voice actor is Bruce Campbell himself. It's just those damn controls. Double it up with enemies that take forever to die and for the most part take more away from you than you can them, resulting in you constantly needing to refill your energy and ammo throughout. It's a shame because deep down it's not that bad of a game. It's just that damn Resident Evil gameplay styled mechanics. It's simply just not fun. In those games, it's tense. You don't want to run into enemies because they're not only scary for the time, but because killing them is tough. Here, it's less tense, more annoying, and really dragged out. And again, that's a real shame because after speaking to Welsh on Twitter, who gave me the behind the scenes access to plenty of the assets used to make this game, it was cut short. As you can see by this never before seen artwork, some serious love went into this game. The game had some incredible talent behind it. Carlos Huante, for example, ended up working on stuff like Blade Runner 2049, Men in Black and Dune. Peter Broadstutter worked on stuff like The Fifth Element, Sin City and Avatar. In an alternative universe, people are playing Evil Dead Hail to the King and praising it big time, the same way that everyone looked at 2009's Ghostbusters video game, but it's just sadly not the case in this dimension. a true continuation of the series. Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert were even involved in the beginning. More so Rob, as Sam was busy killing Uncle Ben at the time, and they made sure that the Deadites were drawn correctly, removing horns and what have you for the final game's release. Heck, they even sent them the real Necronomicon from the third movie to use as reference, which of course they had to send back. Sadly, as stated, production was cut short. Well, actually it was 3 months behind schedule. They got gifted a further 3 months, but they really needed an extra 6 months on top of that. In other words, this game needed 1 year extra, and it got 6. Remember, this was Heavy Iron Studios' first proper game under the umbrella of THQ. This is why the upgrading of Ash's arm and weapons was cancelled. While several weapons and items got completely removed, an entire section that involved Ash going into the catacombs, that was removed too. And worst of all, it's the reason that this game looks the way it does. You see, with so much talent on the project, the assets found within were made beautifully and totally in HD. Unfortunately, this got dramatically dropped for the PlayStation release as expected, but when it came round to porting it into the Dreamcast release, they didn't have time to change them back to the original HD textures, so they just stretched out the PlayStation assets and called it a day. And just when you think they fixed it for the PC release, nope, that's even worse, as that release ended up getting its assets slammed into an early upscaler that resulted in all assets that looked like this instead of this. Absolutely criminal. Either way, taking all that aside, the game still at least looks the part. The setting is all there, and in the second half of the game you even go back in time to an Army of Darkness styled setting. No, not the Army of Darkness setting specifically, as they didn't have the rights to do that. God. Look, either way, for Evil Dead fans, and there's a lot of you guys out there, Hail to the King is definitely at least worth a watch. But to play, again, it's a game that's held back by a really unfortunate control scheme and a combat system that should be one of the best features, feeling, quite frankly, awful. The game ends with you and Jenny flying back in time to an alternative dimension or alternative timeline due to the things they changed in the past, whatever you decide, and it's here where the Necronomicon is readily available to all, turning the world into a post-apocalyptic Evil Dead-like world, bringing us into the next game.
Oh no. Ash!
What the? No!
Now, as part of those unreleased HD textures and art assets that was, again, thankfully handed over to me by Welsh, thank you very much, buddy, we also got to see this clip that I'm about to show you alongside all of this awesome E3 2000 potato quality footage of Bruce Campbell himself.
Bruce Campbell here, how you doing? I can't talk because I just finished doing the voice for this kooky game, which you better watch or I'll have my people cut you. They'll track you down like dogs. Hail to the king, baby. You know the routine. Get it. Go, go, go. Hey, how you doing? Bruce Campbell here. I'm at E3 promoting THQ's Hail to the King, baby. No, is that it? Evil Dead, Hail to the King. Evil Dead, Hail to the King. Of course, I knew that. What are you, crazy? So get this stinking game or I'll cut you.
But, as stated, on top of that, we also got to see a promo for the sequel. The trailer confirms that the Evil Dead has taken over and that man has been driven into the shadows as the iconic speedy camera from the movies flies across the street. It possesses a passerby called Kirby, presumably named after Kyle Kirby, who worked on the game, right outside the Raimi cinema that's showing Within the Woods. Very nice, very nice. The iconic Raimi camera continues on as it smashes down a lamppost that briefly shows the dev team from the original game, who are all missing. It smashes through a petrol station that has the Heavy Iron Studio logo attached. It zooms past the car and finds Ash and Jenny right outside the bookshop where the last game left off. And, sorry Ash, but that girl you've been trying to save throughout the whole last game just got possessed. So you have to kill her, and there you have it, your teaser.
What the? Come on, I got plenty for everybody. Doc's got it.
Now, this unreleased game did kind of get released. However, it changed hands and therefore changed its story too. Kind of. You see, in the sequel, it's not get up and go straight away. You actually fight off the Deadites about 10 years later, after someone on a talk show translates the Necronomicon live on air, sending the sound waves far and wide. The rest of the game turns into fetch quest after fetch quest after fetch quest. It's not bad. Personally, I prefer the story of the original, but the gameplay here is significantly better, albeit as repetitive as you would expect. Look, I can't deny it. I like this game, as did Bruce Campbell himself, apparently.
I like the fact that people like these movies, so I'm happy to give him the next best thing. You know, Sam's making Spider-Man now. It might be a little tougher to get that Evil Dead 4 cranking out. So in the meantime, yeah, seriously, I'm really sincere when I say that this is the next best thing.
Yep, that's Bruce. I don't like it either. Unfortunately, not a lot is known about the making of this game, except that, as stated, it's not made by Heavy Iron anymore, but instead Viz Entertainment, using the State of Emergency series engine to create this. For me, it kind of feels like a prequel to the Dead Rising series, and that's a good thing. Don't expect greatness with a fistful of Boomstick, and like me, you will be surprised at just how perfectly fine this game is to play, as is Evil Dead Regeneration. In fact, Evil Dead Regeneration is probably my all-time favourite Evil Dead game. Now, in our timeline, we've gone from movie number 1 that had a game based on it to movie number 2 to 3 that had 2 games that followed on the story from that, and this game fits in here, between number 2 and number 3. If the ending of number 2, which leads to the beginning of number 3, didn't happen. In other words, Army of Darkness and the games that follow, yeah, let's just pretend they don't exist. I told you this series has no continuity. Anyway, the game begins and it's familiar territory as expected. But as this is 2005, everything looks and plays so much better this time. You get a recreation of sorts from that iconic madhouse scene from the second movie, and another recreation of Ash flying through the woods and hitting the tree before becoming possessed. Just like the movie. However, unlike the movie, you discover that possession for Ash essentially turns you into this game's version of the werehog. But that's a good thing here. In this game's version of events, Ash gets sent to a mental hospital, which actually makes perfect sense, where one of the doctors finds the Necronomicon and it all happens again. Look, if you're this far into the video, my guess is you're a big fan of Evil Dead 2 specifically. And even though this game kind of destroys the possibility of that movie going into number 3 and everything after it, so did the TV show. And the TV show was absolutely awesome. What I'm trying to say is that Evil Dead Regeneration is definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of Evil Dead 2, which again, I'm guessing you definitely are. It's a fantastic what-if game that does the stupidly messed up timeline proud. Your sidekick in this game is the brilliantly annoying little deadite voiced by Todd Raimi, aka Sam's brother, who played Henrietta from the second film. Overall, even though I don't like the cliffhanger ending this game provides, that's just par for the course by this point within the world of Evil Dead. And even though we don't have much info on the making of this game besides a making of video that came on a PlayStation Magazine DVD that really tells us nothing and is just a promo video if not anything else, in the extras of the game itself, Bruce Campbell says the following.
I've even done a video game, a voice for a video game that never came out because by the time we were done, it was a completely outmoded platform. They were like, we don't do that anymore, bye. Well, that was a waste of recording, but you just do what you can. So hopefully this one will be groovalicious.
Now, Bruce could be talking about the original sequel to the PlayStation's Hail to the King, but honestly, who knows? I tried finding this information out myself by speaking to the original developers of that game, and they don't think any lines got recorded for that game. Either way, this is all we've got, and at least it is worth mentioning. Evil Dead Regeneration, even with its mixed reviews upon release, is the best Evil Dead experience that you can have in a video game so far. Now, before we get into what is definitely the very best Evil Dead video game, now's probably a good time to get through all of the mobile games and all of the cameos that featured Ash Williams and other characters within the world of Evil Dead. Evil Dead Pinball was a 2003 Java-based mobile game that has completely nothing to do with Evil Dead. Apparently you are collecting pages of the Necronomicon, but honestly, it looks like nothing. Oh no, actually, look, when you die, you see that iconic image from the first film. Nice. Army of Darkness Defense was an iOS tower defense game from 2011 where you play as a cartoony-like Ash Williams fighting off cartoony-like enemies. Now, as this game is a mobile game, you no doubt expect me to tell you that it's crouched. But, surprisingly, it's not. The game scored above average as tower defense games go. This one's slightly on the shallow side, but it's still a good fun time, especially for fans of the movie as Ash comes back to voice the character once again. The same year we got Evil Dead the game for iOS. Ever wanted to know what the original Evil Dead trailer would look like if it was made by an Animal Crossing team? Well, here you go. Surprisingly, this 30-level long game retells the story of the original fairly well. I mean, from my brief interaction, the enjoyment wears off seriously quick. And of course, all you really want to do is pick up a controller and play that version instead. But still, it is at least an interesting angle to take for the Evil Dead franchise. And the same goes for Evil Dead Endless Nightmare. This one came out 5 years later and was based on the remake from 2013. This time we have an endless runner. You basically run towards the woods as you see how far you can get before the Deadites kill you. The hook for this game is to see how many challenges from the Necronomicon you can achieve in a single run, unlocking weapons and what have you the more you do. Of course, you can pay to keep running or unlock those items sooner, but that's par for the course with these things. Now, surprisingly, even though the game is long delisted, like most of these games are, it too was actually well received for the most part. A quality little title for fans of the remake by all accounts. Evil Dead Virtual Nightmare takes this concept and puts it into VR and, well, you saw the previous game. This is more of that. It's obviously a tad more polished, but after playing it a few times, you will have this game down and probably not be too interested in picking it up again. However, if you did want to pick it up again, you can, because it got ported to phones once again with the added polish that the VR version got, and it's now called Extended Nightmare. And then, of course, you got all of the cameos. Ash vs Evil Dead characters show up in the mobile game Deploy and Destroy, which by all accounts is a fairly popular first-person arena shooter for mobiles. Ash shows up in the forgettable Family Guy and the Quest for Stuff game. He also appears in Fortnite. Yes, in Fortnite. That was an interesting conversation I had to have with my 8-year-old son who asked who Ash was in his favourite game of all time. Look, I don't like Fortnite. It's not my cup of tea, as is the case for a lot of my retro gaming subscribers, I'm sure. But they've done a bloody good job with Ash Williams, although I can't imagine that 75% of the fan base would know this character's origins. Telltale's Poker Night 2 has Ash from Army of Darkness as an unplayable character. Weirdly, Steam keys for this go for silly money these days, and Ash isn't even voiced by Bruce Campbell this time anyway.
Is that the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the cursed book of the dead, wrapped in the flesh of a demon whose words bring death and destruction to all who read them?
No, it's a cookbook. Of course it's the Necronomicon. Now let's play.
And to date, it's the only time that this has happened. The procedurally generated papercraft-looking Phantom Halls PC game included Ash from Evil Dead 2. This one actually surprised me. It totally passed me by, yet it's actually not that bad at all. A cool little indie game that has nowhere near enough reviews. If you see it on the cheap, definitely go and pick it up. And of course, Ash appears in Dead by Daylight 2, the multiplayer game where several players try and outsmart a typical horror-like killer, and for fans of games like this, it's a great little addition. Sadly, I'm not one of them. Evil Dead, the game, is easily the best game in the franchise, which is why I'm so sad and excited to say that I'm just not a fan of online multiplayer games. To the right sort of gamer, this game is fantastic. It's scored very highly, but again, I'm not that sort of gamer. I'm more of a single player adventure, action driven sort of gamer, and this game is simply not that. Yep. Evil Dead the game is not only the final game that we'll be talking about in this video, but also by far the best. But you don't want to hear about my views on this game. I'm terrible at it, which is why I think it's far better to have somebody else talk about this game. Take it away, Andy Campbell, aka Bruce Campbell's son.
Hello, I'm Andy Campbell, also known as Andy Campbell GG from Twitch and YouTube. And yes, I do happen to be Bruce Campbell's son, so get over it. Evil Dead the Game is the highly rated 2022 online asymmetrical multiplayer survival horror game where you take control of Ash Williams, or Ash Williams, or Ash Williams, or Ash Williams. And the aim of the game is to evade, you guessed it, evil Ash Williams. Other characters do also exist though. In fact, there's 22 other characters. You choose between a team of 4 survivors or a single Kandarian demon trying your best to kill the 4 survivors. Playing as those survivors feels great and puts you directly into whatever movie or show that they came from. And on the flip side, playing as the demon is way more fun than it should be. No matter what side you're on, its biggest strength is that it sucks you right into the world of Evil Dead better than any other horror movie adaptation to date.
My God, am I butthurt that this game isn't a single player experience, because this perfect looking title with the original voice actors is quite literally perfect. The cabin is here in all its gory glory. Similar to the Friday the 13th and of course the Dead by Daylight games, this is the natural progression of that team-based cat and mouse online multiplayer mayhem that you have come to expect. Killing Deadites just never felt so good. It's never looked so good. It's never sounded so good. It's just so good. Again, if you're the right sort of gamer, which I'm not. I don't even have a PlayStation Online subscription. This is just a £25 prop. It pains me to explore these stupidly iconic settings and not see them with a story that's at the very least on par with stuff found in the previous Evil Dead trilogy of games.
For the right kind of gamer that's into the films and TV show that the game is based on, Evil Dead the game is perfection. And no, I'm not just saying that because I'm Bruce Campbell's son. Even though I am Bruce Campbell's son, Andy Campbell, the son of Bruce Campbell. I'm Bruce Campbell's son. Don't forget to subscribe to my Twitch and YouTube channel.
Let's just hope that this isn't the end for the video games, because it's definitely not the end for the movies. It's a great time to be a fan following this franchise. If I made this video a month or 2 ago, I would have told you that Bruce Campbell has officially given up on playing the role on screen. But now, he's dropping hints that he may reprise that role. Honestly, who knows when we will see him next? What I do know is that the character is far from gone, as is the Evil Dead franchise as a whole. 2023's Evil Dead Rise showed the world that the franchise is far from over, and in an interview with AV Club, Bruce went on to say, "I think the stories will progress a little more now. We're going to try and do them more like every 2 to 3 years rather than every 10 years. It's also the first time Sam is working with his brother Ivan to create an overall Bible that will give future writers and directors an idea on where this thing should go next to potentially tie in some of those stories. So I think it's going to get a little more tied in as years go by. But because it's all about the books, it could be a book in the past, a book in the future. It's all yet to be determined." And that to me sounds amazing. No matter if you're a fan of the splatstick stylings of the Ash trilogy or prefer to see the virtually endless amounts of blood that the remakes provide, or even if you're a big fan of all of the video games, if history has taught us one thing, is that this tiny little movie made by a group of eager students over 40 years ago isn't going to be stopping anytime soon. Is one of the most consistent yet confusing horror franchises of all time, and its future is looking mighty groovy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is The Evil Dead, the history and the games. If you guys want to check out the interviews that I put in for this very video, Richard Leinfelder and Chris Neary from Palace Software, some great behind-the-scenes stories, then they are available to all Patreons and YouTube members. Thank you guys for allowing me to make this video. If you guys want to become a supporter of the show, you can get access to Slope's Password Zone, and there you'll get access to an absolute treasure trove of behind-the-scenes stuff, early versions of videos, all without adverts or sponsorships. There's an insane amount in there. Go and check it out. And yeah, there's plenty more people I want to say thank you before I get to Patrons and YouTube members. Sean Clark's Horrors Hallowed Grounds, an incredible video he did on the location of the original Evil Dead cabin now that it's smashed down, burnt down, but that man is seriously knowledgeable on all things horror. Go check his channel out. Jason Arnott's Terrifying House of Obsession had an incredible Evil Dead collection, which I showed in this video. bookofthedead.ws. Wow, what an incredible website. If you want to know anything to do with anything Evil Dead, you go there. That website is insane, absolutely insane. The amount of information on that website is incredible. Andy Campbell, thank you for being a part of the video. Welsh, thank you so much, my friend, for handing over those assets that I could use in this video. Made the video so much better with you being involved. Thank you. Shiraz Akmal, Mark Morris, Carlos Huante, all of you people that worked on those later games, thank you for speaking to me privately in conversations as well. And yeah, like I say, now's the part of the video where I like to give a massive shout out to all of my Patreons and YouTube members, with an extra big shout out going to Agro Crag, Akatimo84, Andrew Dalton, Arista, Benjamin Guy, Benzuko, Boots and Pup, Bram Perez, Chevmatic, Clan Bob, Conrad Constantine, De Action Saxon, Dina, Dina81, Derek Huda, Game Apologist, Ian Quell, Jay Isman Child, Jabba Al Aiden, James, Jeff Mianowski, John Rogers, Jura, Kat Layton, Man Shovel, Matt Jackson, Mike Fallon, Mind of the Unsane, Nicholas Burtner, Over Giles Zane, Penn, Roll VP, Ray Blair, Richard Alderjick, Ryan Burford, Sir Nilsson, Shade Silent, Shadow Dragon, Stephen, That Gamer, the Sneaky Ferret, Tim Lunn, Todd Paul Float G, Vitas Varnes, Vike Echo, Wobbles and Bean, The Wonder Ducks, Yelled Hamburglar, and Ziggy Golightly. Thank you all for allowing me to make these videos every single week. If you guys want to get your name shown down below, get access to all of that stuff I talked about, and be part of so many other amazing things, then become a Patreon or YouTube member at any level. But until next time, guys, this is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.